Today, we become legends.
Which ability in Smite does the absolute highest damage? It's a question that I'm sure everyone is itching to get an answer for in 2023. With almost 130 gods in Smite, some simply stand above the rest in terms of having abilities that do a completely absurd amount of damage. Some quick ground rules before we jump in though. These abilities will be taken as they are with no synergies or buffs from the rest of their kit or other gods. I will also be using 300 physical and 600 magical power to calculate the scaling portion of these abilities. I could go with using actual builds for each god, but that would make the video even more complicated than it already is. I will also be excluding certain abilities like executes, which technically deal 9999 true damage, percent health or missing health damage abilities that can vary a lot, infinite damage abilities like Skadi's Wolf, Tiamat minions or Vulcan turret, Hera's Argus is in this same vein as well. All of these abilities either vary widely in their damage output or technically have infinite damage, so they're excluded but mentioned here. One final thing, this is taking damage to a single target, not hitting multiple enemies, so stuff like Nua's ult won't make it, as well as Scylla's ult won't be counting as 5 resets, just 1 hit. So kicking off our list at the 10th most damaging ability in Smite, we have a true classic that just made the list by a hair, Anher's Desert Fury. Dealing a total of 1320 plus 240% of physical power, with our 300 power number, the total damage of this ability comes out to 2040. Yep, the lowest placement on this list already does over 2000 raw damage, and believe me, we're just getting started with the absolute insanity that is max damage output in Smite. As we get further up the list, the situations where these abilities will realistically do their max damage get more and more far-fetched, but at least for this one, it's pretty realistic to hit all 8 spears on your target and deal massive damage to boot. Continuing the physicals, as believe me, there won't be many more on this list, Naja's Windfire Wheels is pretty iconic for its massive damage output, but how does it fare? Well, if we include Deathbringer crits on the 3 sky hits, the total damage of this ability comes out to 2286. And while this ability only takes number 9 on the list, it's definitely the most realistic to actually land this damage in a real match. Just hit an enemy without beads and you're golden to deal over 2000 raw damage with this ultimate. Next up, and pretty much the final realistic entry we have, is Zeus's Lightning Storm, which can deal up to 1100 base damage plus 275% of magical power if all 5 ticks hit an enemy. Most of the time you won't be able to lock an enemy down into all 5 hits of this, but it is definitely still possible to do in a real game. Our next entry takes that concept and basically throws it out of the window. Anubis ult is often thought of as the highest damage ability in Smite, and for good reason. It hits insanely hard over a fairly short period of time, and he has a stun to confirm most of the hits before the enemy can jump away or juke the rest of it. So why and how is Anubis ult only the 7th most damaging ability in Smite? It deals 1290 plus 450% scaling, which is just absolutely absurd, and really kicks the rest of this list up to a new level. It comes out to a total of 3990 damage with our 600 magical power number factored in. So if you are wondering what on earth does more total damage than Anubis ult, I have quite a few for you here, but first up at number 6 is Baba Yaga's ultimate, Home Sweet Home. This ability is similar to Anubis ult in terms of it dealing long duration tick damage that isn't super realistic to hit all ticks of in a match. But in a theoretical setting, this ability does some of the absolute highest damage in the entire game. When adding up the initial hit, the burst damage from the bolts, and the tick damage from the Witchfire, this ability comes out to a grand total of 1808 base damage plus 410% power scaling. That's a total of 4268 damage and just beats out Anubis' classic Death Gaze by about 200 damage or so. Breaking into the top 5 highest damage abilities in Smite though, let's take a look at Cleaner's ultimate, Tearing the Veil. Now, small caveat here, I am taking this ability as 2 casts since it has 2 charges, and at the start of most teamfights you're gonna have 2 casts of this available, essentially doubling its potential damage output. If you have a problem with this, fuck you. If you have a problem with this, I totally understand. There's no real objective way to do this kind of video, and I have to make some concessions. But with 2 casts of Clearwal, each dealing 1490 plus 216%, we come out to a total damage output of 4276. Literally 8 damage higher than Baba Yaga. It's funny how the cookie crumbles sometimes. At the number 4 spot though, we have basically another addition of tick damage lines at OP in this format. Ishel's ultimate is an interesting case since it extends its duration massively if she is healing an ally and damaging an enemy with it at the same time. This is hard to do in a real match, but we don't care about reality here, we just want to see big number go up, and if maximized, Ishel's ult doubles in duration from 3 seconds to 6 seconds. This ability already hits hard, but when the duration is extended in this way, it ends up dealing a grand total of 2600 base damage plus 400% of magical power, which comes out to exactly 5000 damage. Clean. Okay, top 3. This is where shit gets really crazy and we have a bunch of OP majors, right? Nope, at number 3 is not only a basic ability, it's a Guardian basic ability. Can you guess who? Good guess, it's Craen and his infamous Tremors. These puppies got a huge buff recently to become basically a toggle ability, but that doesn't change the fact that, for the purposes of this video, it's one of the highest damage single cast abilities in the entire game. This is pretty much purely down to its utterly insane 10-second duration and tick rate of 2 hits per second. That gives a total of 20 ticks, each of which deals a decent amount of base damage. But the most important part here is that this Guardian ability has 35% scaling per tick for some ungodly reason. That's 70% of your magical power dealt per second to everyone in that area, and it lasts 10 seconds. No wonder people are starting to play Craen mid in SPL. Okay, all jokes aside though, this ability in our theoretical bubble for this video is completely ridiculous, and does a grand total of 1218 base damage, nothing too crazy, but the whopping 735% of your magical power over the 10-second duration is insane. That comes out to a total damage number of 5628. Yeah, bet you weren't expecting that when you saw Anubis ult so far down this list, were you? Continuing on down the rabbit hole into the number 2 spot though, we have the previous king of high total damage, and yes, it's another Guardian. For some reason, these guys just get off on the fact that they have more damage than half the mages in the game for this scenario. Ganesha's ultimate for the longest time was the highest damage ability in the entire game. It has been beaten by a recent god release though. Leave your guesses down below. For Dharmic Pillars though, this ability is very similar to Craen's Tremors in that it ticks twice per second and has a really long duration. This one only lasts 6 seconds compared to 10 with Tremors, but it does way more damage per tick. And over the total of 12 hits of this ability that it can dish out, the damage comes to 3150 base plus 504% scaling. That's utterly bonkers, and while it has less scaling than Tremors, it has way more base damage and beats it out in terms of total at 6174 raw damage. Before we get to the only god in the game capable of beating that number though, I have a few honorable mentions that didn't quite make the list. I mentioned Scylla in the beginning, but I'll do it again here just for the people that I know will comment saying that Scylla's ult with 5 resets beats everything on the list. While that is true, it sort of falls outside the scope of damaging a single target in one cast of the ability that I have for this video. Ares chains almost made the list as well since they can last up to 8 seconds if maximized, which comes out to 1200 base and 120% scaling, falling just short of 2000 damage and not quite making the list. Suku and Martikaras ults came similarly close with around 2000 as well. And finally, I'll mention the abilities most people think of as the highest damage ones, like max range Vulcanul, max charge Thothul, max charge Esetul, etc. While all of these abilities hit insanely hard for practical purposes, they fall short for the theoretical scope of this video and lose out to tick damage abilities. But I just thought I'd mention all those big bursty ults here. But finally, the moment you've all been waiting for, the one ability that can out-damage Ganesha ult, and for that we have to turn to Smite's newest release, at least as of making this video, Maman Brigitte. Maman's 1 has a very interesting mechanic of being able to cancel the ability early while only consuming 5 out of your 100 fuel. Doing so applies the burn for an initial tick and 3 more ticks afterwards, so every time you burn 5 fuel and cancel, you get 4 ticks of damage. Since you can do this cancel 20 times using your 100 fuel, you end up with a whopping 80 total burn ticks. Each one only deals 38 plus 10% scaling, but when we're talking about something hitting you 80 times, that damage simply adds up to something no other god can currently currently compare to within Smite. The 80 ticks come out to 7840, and adding on the final slam damage where she stuns targets brings us to 8250, comfortably beating out second place on this list and more than 4 times the total damage output of number 10. Of course, I'll say it one more time for clarity, this is not realistic in any way whatsoever, and these numbers should not be used to claim a god is strong. But I thought it would be interesting to take another look at this topic. I made a similar video many years ago, but the quality was really bad and quite a few new gods have come out in the last 5 years or so that make the list in the modern day. So I thought it was worthy of updating, and I made it a top 10 instead of a top 5 like it was before. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, don't forget to drop a like before you leave, and I'll catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.